Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. The goal of this podcast is to demystify therapy, what can happen in therapy, and the wide array of conversations you can have in and about therapy. Through personal experiences, guests will talk about therapy, their experiences with it, and how psychology and therapy are present in many places in their lives. With lots of authenticity and a touch of humor, here is your host, Steve Bisson.
Merci infiniment. Thank you. And welcome to episode 120. If you haven't listened to episode 119 yet, please go back and listen to it. This is a very important documentary called First Responders in Crisis. And I had the privilege to have one of the main people from the documentary, as well as the director-producer and another director-producer. So please go back and listen to that. But for episode 120, we're bringing back Lynn Kee. Lynn is someone who was on episode 109 and 110. She discussed her grooming and sexual abuse that she went through, as well as the following substance use and addiction, the loss of her sister. And on episode 120, she's going to talk about the legal ramification of all this and what happens after there's a conviction. So I hope you enjoy the interview, and here it is. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 120 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am Steve Bisson, and I'm so excited to have Lynn Kee back. She was on episode 109, episode 110, and we needed to talk about the legal ramification of her whole story. And, you know, what's interesting is that, when you know your story and you know what you went through and all that, that's easy sometimes to say back for some people. Some others, it's hard. But ultimately, right now, the hardest part is going to be to talk about these legal ramifications, because they are complex and they are frustrating and they're demanding. And we are not here to destroy anyone's character, but rather make sure that other people don't have those same issues. So as we navigate this together, I want to introduce Lynn Kee.
Hi, Steve. How are you today?
You know what? It's been a day, and very happy to have you on again. I want to mention that I want everyone to go back to 109 and 110 to hear your story. I would say that I got positive feedback from just about everyone, and people really felt that they got a full story from your point of view, and they really enjoy that. So I want to mention that to you. I think I told you privately, but let's put it on the show too. But now let's talk a little more about you. And I know that if people haven't gone down yet to 109 and 110 to listen to it yet, how about you do a quick introduction of yourself?
Yes, Steve. Absolutely. First and foremost, I want to say thank you so much for having me back again. I truly appreciate the time and energy you've put into helping me to tell my story and get this stuff out there. The number one thing I'm concerned about is helping others with my story. So I do just wicked appreciate that. So just to reintroduce myself, my name is Lynn Kee. Obviously, I am from a small town called Northbridge, Massachusetts. Both myself and my sister were survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Both of us went through the process with the justice system. Both of us also subsequently became addicts. We struggled with trauma, obviously, and the substance abuse issues that resulted from that trauma. Unfortunately, my sister lost her battle with her complex PTSD and the substance abuse that resulted from that back in January of this year. I myself have been blessed and lucky enough to make it into recovery once for a little under a decade. It's about 7 years straight. And then again, after a brief relapse due to surgeries and stuff like that, I've been in recovery for about 2 years. So that is who I am and what I'm here to talk about, essentially.
And, Lynn, when you go back to those podcasts, we'll give you a fair warning that the first one especially talks about a grooming experience and sexual abuse that she went through. And for those of you who feel like that might be too graphic, giving you the heads up. To me, as a therapist, as a person who's seen it through my whole career, your story was essential for people to hear that they're not alone and that you can survive this and you can fight it back. So I thank you for sharing your story. That was so essential to other people who have been victims and have told me that. And then normalizing the fact that not everyone's going to go through this, but unfortunately, because you don't have all the coping mechanism, and I'm not picking on you, Lynn, obviously, you know that, you start going to different types of things. You avoid it, or you go to substances to avoid it and what have you. So it's a continuous battle. I don't think anyone ever wins the addiction war ever, but we definitely conquer it, and we definitely develop skills, and the strength that it takes to be sober for any amount of time, to me, is something I admire. So I wanted to mention that too.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Steve. It's a hard fought battle, and I know my sister was fighting very hard as well, unfortunately, when she passed away. So I do appreciate that.
I'm just done with people telling me that it doesn't affect them, when in fact it affects 1 out of 4 people. And if you know 4 people, that means you know one person. Um, so I want to make sure I emphasize that. And you're a hard work in treatment in order to get to where you're at, whether it's the self-help groups or in treatment in general, because that's something you mentioned in the other podcast, 110. And I want to mention that too, because treatment does work. And obviously that's part of your story. And I really want to share that too. But now that we're going to the third part of your story, and to me, I've worked in the legal system since probably 2003-ish, when I graduated out of my master's program. And I knew how much of a headache it was. And that's from someone who, other than the divorce, not having, and knock on wood, not having to deal with the legal system myself. I'm sure that you don't hope that I ever have to deal with it either. But let's talk about that, because I knew it was nightmarish. I could see it in my clients. This is by far what I always knew about the SORB, or we nickname it SORB. It's called the Sex Offender Registry Board in Massachusetts. So I want to make sure we use all the terms for people who are listening who may not know them. I mean, there's so many headaches that I don't even want. I don't even know where to start, Lynn. I'll be honest with you. And I want you to start, because it's your story. The legal system has not been kind throughout the years to you.
Yes. So I think the first thing to say is that for me, Steve, and I think the research is proving it more and more as time goes on, trauma is the gateway drug. And that certainly proved to be the case for both my sister and I. My sister's name, no problem. That's my message. My sister's name was Amanda Hernandez. I just want to put that out there. I feel she should be remembered as an individual, as well as in context of the greater message. But for both of us, it played out that way. And the justice system is both a path to healing to a certain extent, because obviously you hopefully get some semblance of accountability and punishment, for lack of a better term, for the offender. But in addition, it is also, and in our case, it certainly was extremely, extremely re-traumatizing. It's a secondary trauma. And unfortunately for me personally, that was not just the case at the time of the original prosecution, trial, and conviction of my offender. Just to remind people, if they
Please do.
if they have forgotten my sister's story, my sister's offender was convicted but ran from the courthouse on the day of his conviction as the jury was coming back. He was on the lam for about 2 years, and America's Most Wanted actually apprehended him. For me, my offender, it took 6 years from the time of the offense to the completion of the process, and 2 trials to convict him. My offender was sentenced to about 4 years in prison, 3 to 4 years, with 5 years to be served after the fact. I was told that there would be 5 years of probation to be served after the fact. I was told that there would be lifetime sex offender registration. He'd be classed when he was released. I was also told that there would be a lifetime stay away order.
Okay. So that's part of what the message is, right? Lifetime is not lifetime.
Well, come to find out, and this is the thing. I remained blissfully unaware of some of this up until very recently. My sister's offender was sentenced to 15 to 18, and he was going to serve an additional 2 years for running, we were told. Same conditions when it came to registration and the stay away, but he was in this country illegally, so he was also to be deported by ICE. Again, at the time of my sister's death, we had a countdown of about 3 to 4 years until the time he was set to be released and deported. But at the time of my sister's death, she was concerned about that, but it wasn't like a thing that was in her day-to-day consciousness. For me, my offender and what was going on with him certainly was not in my day-to-day consciousness. I had put that behind me. I was working to overcome my addiction. It wasn't like I was sitting around using because I was thinking about the rape. I was using because of the trauma and the maladaptive coping mechanisms that come from dealing with the symptoms of said trauma, which, as we discussed, tend to mirror the symptoms of active addiction, just in a different way. My sister was also very trauma affected. So if you don't mind, I'll just get into how this all came back into our day-to-day lives, our consciousness.
Please do. And I want to hear more about what happened with you, because the reason why I set it up also is that lifetime doesn't mean lifetime. And
yes,
that's something that anyone who has been a victim, never mind of any crime, but particularly sex crimes, need to hear. And this is what the message is here.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's a life sentence for us, right? Regardless of whether or not, and for my sister, arguably a death sentence. Unfortunately, it's just the reality of the situation. So for me, what happened is I was early in my recovery, and I've been a member of a church. Well, since the day I was born, I've been involved with the church, right? But I've been a member of this particular church around the town that I grew up in since I was about 12 years old. My ninny, my grandmother, my paternal grandmother was a member of that church. She got buried out of that church, right? But I hadn't been in person in quite some time. I attended virtually on Sundays, which didn't include for me the praise music, right? Because I just wanted to see the sermon. That was the main reason. I listen to praise music in my car all the time, though. It's kind of funny, the things that stick with us, right? So it was Maundy Thursday. Which, if you don't know anything about, the quote unquote Christian religion, right, is the Thursday night before Good Friday. And Good Friday is the Friday before Easter. And it happened to be both my ninny and I's favorite religious service of the year. So I thought, might as well go. So I got a ride because at this time, again, I didn't have my license. I didn't have a vehicle. I was a couple of months clean. This was April of not this past year, but the year before. And I had gotten clean December 26th. Yep. I had gotten clean December 26th of 2021. So this was
your
early
second stint.
2022. Right? Yeah. And this is my second stint in sobriety, in sobriety, because
I consider it all sobriety, but
yeah, this is my first real recovery, if that makes sense. The first time working a program. So anyway, I go to church. And I walk into the sanctuary with my fiance. We go to sit down in the back left side of the church. And the praise band is on stage, and they are, playing praise music, which is one of my favorite parts of the service when I'm there in person. It's how I really connect with my higher power, if that makes sense. If you have watched the previous episodes, and even if you haven't, I'll say it. I am a singer. I've been a singer since I was little. I play guitar. My offender was actually my guitar teacher. So as well, as a firefighter on my dad's department. So essentially I look up, and standing on stage, for lack of a better term, if you've ever been in a congregational church, it's almost like a stage as opposed to like an altar, in a Catholic church, is a man. And this is the best way to describe it for me in that moment, is a man who looked just like my offender. And I immediately was like, that can't possibly be my offender, because at the time I knew this person, he didn't even believe in God. Like, he wasn't even sure he believed in God. In addition to that, this is the church I was going to at the time that this situation was happening. And this was a grooming situation, as you said, Steve. This man knew everything about me. In addition to that, I went to a Christian camp every summer, which is actually where I reported, and that was affiliated with the church. It wasn't run by the church, but the church sent all its kids to this camp. And this camp testified against this gentleman. So not only would this gentleman, although this gentleman looked just like him that was standing in front of me, and although this man that raped me played guitar, there was no way. Not only would he not be like at a church in general, but he would certainly not be at this particular church. So as I'm standing there,
and just before you go on, and
yeah,
let's take in consideration, how long ago was it?
I last saw him in 2006 when he was taken out of the courtroom.
I just want to make sure that people hear, because 2006, 2020, in 14 years, we all change. I mean, that's something to keep in mind here. So please go ahead.
And again, this was 2022, because I got clean in December of 21.
Sorry
so
about
this
the
was
year.
2022. So it was over 15 years, right, since I had last seen this man. So I'm standing there and I didn't react because, again, this can't possibly be real. And he is a good, I don't know, at least 30 to 50 feet, not that far, but 30 to 50 feet in front of me. I'm at the back, he's at the front, and I'm standing there staring. So after about 5 minutes of this, I realized, like, there's no way that this is not this man. He looked exactly as I remember him. And I just knew that it was him. And so then I kind of started to freak out a little bit internally, to say the least.
So just for the record, freak out is a misnomer. I think
I apologize.
The right words, I'm going to translate what she said. And hopefully you understand my second language. My first language is French, so I'm good at translation. What the fuck is the translation that I want to make? Go ahead.
Accurate. It was a what the fuck moment, Steve. Like,
you did say that, but I translate really well.
Yeah, to say the least, it really was. So I tapped, because we're in a church. People are worshiping, and this man is on stage. He is participating in the production of the worship music. So I can't exactly just start yelling and screaming. So I turn, which is what
you just screamed in your head, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I turn to my fiance and I tap him and I draw him closer and I say in his ear, like, you see the guy playing guitar right there? And I pointed and I said, and he said, yeah. And I said, I'm pretty sure that is Mimmer. And he's like, what do we do? Literally, that's what he said. He goes, what do we do? Because he's never seen this guy before. I don't even believe he's ever seen a picture of this guy. This is so far in my past. He knows it's happened to me, obviously, but he has no idea who this guy is. So he said, what do we do? And in that moment, right, I just kind of realized that there is a stay away. Now, this is at the time, and that's very important. I'm like, there's a lifetime stay away. So he might not know that I'm here right now, although I can't believe he forgot that this is my church. So that's a little weird, and I don't like that at all. Right. And that was a very uncomfortable feeling too. I still don't understand that.
And uncomfortable, again, to translate, re-traumatized. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Very much so, because there was a lot of questions there, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But
I just want to put it always in context and use real words, because I know that we want to be very mindful as to saying what we can say, but I also need to put it in words in therapy, because people are like, oh, it's disconcerting. No, it's fucked up. You need to be able to see the reality. And that's what hopefully what you're doing with lifting some of the stigma and explaining these things. But for me, as a therapist who wants this podcast to be bringing people to therapy, let's use real words also. So you don't need to use the real words. I know you're very polite. I finally broke you from calling me sir.
I'll do it at some point.
I know you will probably do it again. But ultimately, I want to make sure we use proper, literally proper language, not in the Queen's words, but real words. And to me, that's proper language. Please go ahead.
And thank you for reminding me of that, because very much so lately I've been in the intellectual sphere when it comes to this. I've been talking to a lot of people about this situation to point out the various different like legislative and procedural and policy failures that exist to have allowed for this in the first place. I've been talking about, solutions for the trauma that causes people to end up in addiction, and solutions for the holes in the system that allow people like my sister to slip through the cracks. And I forget that I'm living through some really difficult shit. My number one response or coping mechanism is to intellectualize things anyway. So when I'm like trying to spread a message, right, like that's exactly where I go.
Now we know you're in therapy. But
For
let,
real.
let me ask you a question here. So let's go back to what you were saying and really just go into the legal aspect of it here
Yes.
for a second. Lifetime, stay away.
Oh yeah, sir. Yep.
What does that mean?
Is.
See, you did it again.
I did
You're
it.
cut
I'm
off.
like, yes,
This interview
sir.
is over.
Yes, sir. So anyway, lifetime stay away. Now, at that moment that I'm standing in the church, lifetime to me means a friggin' lifetime. For the rest of my life, for the rest of his life, whoever goes longer, wins, I guess, right? And there's no more lifetime stay away order at that point. But until that moment, there is a stay away order. At no point can he come near me. And if he comes near me, and obviously he has to know he's near me and all that stuff, see that I'm there. If he does not move away at that point, he is in trouble legally, like one would imagine a restraining order or a harassment order would be. Right. So at that moment, I'm thinking,
as we thought.
I'm thinking in that moment, it is his responsibility to move away from me. This is my church. Last time I checked, he knew this was my church. Don't know why he's here, but we'll deal with that later. I'm not going to disrupt the service. I'm going to stand here in my power and worship my God. And honestly, like that is one of my major coping mechanisms is my faith. So I got on my knees and I got into the music, and I cried hysterically. And it was a very powerful moment for me to be kneeling there, worshiping my God to music being played by my rapist, who shouldn't have even been there because, the camp I went to out of that church testified against him. Like that makes no sense. Who in that moment shouldn't even be there because there's a stay away order, who arguably shouldn't even be there because how does that even happen? He's exposed to a vulnerable population in a position like worship team at a church like that. His target population. So that's how I dealt with it. Now, as the service progressed, right, there was communion. So after he was done playing, he actually got off the stage, and this is another thing I didn't know was going to happen, walked down off the stage and sat about 3 rows in front of me with 2 small children. And in that moment, I realized that he was there with his children. And I was looking for his wife. I did not see her, but he was there with his 2 children. So now I really can't lose my shit. Really can't. Right. There are 2 small children involved. I haven't seen this man since his daughter had not been born yet. His wife was pregnant with his daughter at the time of the sentencing. So for all I knew, these children didn't even know that their father was a sex offender, right. Let alone that they were at the church. And arguably, I would assume at that point, he's in the worship team going to a church that, that victim attended. So it was stressful, to say the least, when communion was called and it was time to get out, of the pew and go up for communion, because at that point, I'm now standing in line and he is 3 rows in front of me. And as I'm standing there with my fiance, I realize that we are going to be very close to one another. And there's really nothing I can do about it. Right. So for about, it felt like an eternity, but I'm guessing it was probably like 3 to 5 minutes. For approximately 3 to 5 minutes, I was within about, I could have reached out and touched him, Steve. Yeah. That's not an exaggeration. I could have reached out and touched him. And there's a crowd, there's a sea of people because people are converging on the middle row from all these rows, and it's a large church. But I could have touched him. And much like he looks exactly the same, I look very much the same. I'm the same weight. I have not aged terribly, I don't think. My voice is quite distinctive. I'm sitting there and I'm standing there, I'm talking to my fiance. Now I didn't make a point to make myself known to this man. Okay, but there's no way that he did not know that I was there. At no point in time does he move away from me. And you can argue that that could have impacted his children, I guess. Sure. I'm sure he could have made some excuse, though. Like, he did not need to
Right.
do that. He didn't.
So I'm going to jump
Yeah.
forward here, if you don't mind.
Go for it. Please do.
You get out of church. I mean, the standard question would be how you're feeling, but I'm pretty sure I know how you're feeling at this point without being too arrogant here about knowing other people feel.
Yeah.
But
I was pretty fucked up, Steve. We'll just we'll just put it that way. I was pretty fucked up.
So how do we deal with going like, okay, do I contact a lawyer? Do I contact the police? What the hell do I do legally? Because this is a really fucked up situation.
Well, I knew in that moment I had protection, right? Or I thought I knew, and it would turn out that I did not. And we'll get into that. Many layers of protection that I thought I had, I did not have, but we'll get into that. Right. So the first thing I did was, again, I used my coping skills. So first and foremost, I thanked God for like getting me through that experience. It was a powerful experience, like in more ways than in that moment I could understand. It was incredibly powerful. I thanked God that I didn't want to get high, because I didn't. And that was very, very noticeable to me, because and I say that for a reason. And that reason is other people need to know that that happens, and it can happen quickly. You have to remember, I was only a few months into my recovery this time around at that point, and that is a major event. I disassociated in a major way once the feeling of what happened set in, once I was through the initial coping mechanism that I believe is automatic. And I think the science backs that up as well, of just kind of like pushing through and figuring out what the F happened. At that point, I disassociated for like fuzzy feeling is what disassociating is. Like, I couldn't concentrate on anything. Everything was overwhelming. You had to like lead me by the nose to like get me through it, the day, the next day, and kind of the day after that. So like, clearly I was very upset, but I was grateful that in that moment, I did not want to get high, and that was amazing. I spoke to my fiance about it, tried to figure out what the fuck I do next. I called either, I don't remember who it was, so I'm not going to pick somebody, but it was one of my closest supporters. I called someone, I talked it through with that person, and I decided like that was a lot, so I'm not going to call anybody tonight, but first thing tomorrow I'm calling somebody, because there is a stay away order, and bare minimum he should have moved away from me. However, I want to know how he's even in that position. How is he in that position? Because there's no way that this church, I know this church, I've been involved with this church forever. The pastor is, and I'm not saying that this doesn't happen, because it does. Obviously, I was groomed by a very trusted family friend and employee who nobody expected to have groomed me, but I could not imagine that they would give themselves that type of liability. Put it that way, Steve. So that's what I did. At that point, I went home. I went to bed. Next day, I called the police. So I'll tell you a little bit about that if you'd like, real quick. Because that was weird. It was weird to call the police. Like,
and just for the record, for those who, I want to make it again clear about what happens. Dissociation, you will call someone and you're going to be like, who the fuck did I call? And this is not abnormal, because that is a good look. It's a trauma response, and people are like, well, you know, trauma. Okay, let me just explain what that response is. You need to survive, and if you go back to the moment of where you were with that person in trauma, you relive it, it's going to be worse. So dissociation in some weird way is a great defense mechanism, so you don't fall back to that. And I want to explain it, because some people are like, oh, I dissociate, that's terrible. I'm like, sometimes can be your best life-saving thing.
Oh yeah.
So that's why she can't remember, and I wanted to explain that as a therapist, because it's important to realize, if we always think that dissociation is bad or whatever is bad, you got to realize sometimes that's the best coping mechanism that we have at that time. Let me hear about your phone call to the police.
Yes. And thank you for that, Steve, because that's what being trauma informed is all about. So I just want to make that point, because a lot of what I'm going to be talking about later on is about the differences between dealing with professionals and services that have trauma informed people working for them, and not. And there is a big difference there. So anyway, so I called the police in the town that the church was located in the next day. And it was a weird scenario, because I'm like, look, hey, I was the victim of rape 20 years ago. This gentleman was a close family friend and a fireman on my dad's department. You might know my dad, this is a surrounding town, whatever. And they did this, obviously. I'm just saying, you know what I mean? Like, this guy should have been held to a higher standard as a fireman, and instead
Right.
was raping the daughter of his chief. So essentially, not a good dude. There's a lifetime stay away. He is at the time, level 2 sex offender. Last time I checked. Not quite sure why he's playing at a church he knew I attended. Not quite sure how that went down. Don't know what to do, but he was within, 3 feet of me max for like 3 to 5 minutes last night. Did not move away. I just want to know what happened. Please, can you help me? And that's the conversation that I had with the officer. Now, again, I'm like, there's a crime here, but dude, the officer looks this gentleman up, right? And he's like, well, I'm not seeing a stay away. I am seeing the convictions for, 4 counts of rape of a child back in 2006. I am seeing the restraining order, because at the time it was a restraining order that was in place leading up to that. But I'm not seeing anything else. Let me look into this. I'm gonna look into this, and I'm gonna give you a call back. And I'm like, okay, well, that's weird. But also, he raped me, right? And he was convicted of raping me. So maybe it's just like in with the conviction. It's not like a thing that just like pops up right away.
And in Massachusetts, just to clear up, level 1 is the lowest level of sex offender, and level 3 is the highest. So he was the second level. Just wanted to explore that there, just so that in case people don't know how that works.
Right. And it's based on the crime itself, yes, but it's also based on the risk of reoffense. And that is also important to talk about at some point in this conversation. We'll get there.
Oh, no. We're gonna talk about one thing right now. It's based upon how good your lawyer was. Excuse me, but if that
Steve,
offends
you said
anyone,
it.
I don't really care if it offends you, but that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And if Sorb wants to contact me, you know where to find me. All right, please continue, Lynn. I apologize. Needed to say
yes. No, it's cool. So at that point, I put the police and the church piece of it behind me, because they're going to do their job, right? That's the best I can do. I've had to learn that you can only do what you can do, and then you got to let the system do what the system does, and then you might have to adjust course, and that's that, right? So what I did do, though, is I called my victim witness advocate. Now, my victim witness advocate is an amazing human being. She has been working for the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office since shortly before getting assigned to my case, couple years, maybe like brand new, essentially at the time. And she still works there to this day. So we have been in close contact over the years for various different reasons. Inquiring about various services when it came to like trying to get help for both mine and my sister's addiction. There at one point was an appeal that my sister's offender won, and so we had to deal with that as a family. This woman so happened to also have been assigned to my sister's case. So it was all very centralized through this one woman. So who did I want to call to get actual advice on what the hell my rights were, what my protections were, and what to do from here? And just also to be like, can you effing believe that this dude had the gall to come and play in a praise band at the church that his victim belonged to at the time of the offense? Like, he had no reason to believe I would not still be going to that church. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, it's just crazy. It's insane to me. And I had been to that church within a few years' time, and he wasn't playing. So this was recent for all intents and purposes. Like, I knew it had to have been in the last couple of years, and that just made no sense to me. Still does not make any sense to me. So basically, I called this lady, the victim witness advocate, who I consider a friend at this point. She has been so close to my family for so many years. It's insane. And she is equally as floored, agrees there's no way. How could he not know? And how was he in that position in the first place? Because we're guessing the church has some sort of standard operating procedure, which, by the way, they did. We'll get there. It just wasn't followed to rule out sex offenders. And, what's his current status? We needed to look into. And what's the state of the stay away, and how do we go about getting after that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Couple of days later, she gets back to me. I believe this is the order of operations because, again, the memory of the specifics is sometimes there, but the timeline is not. And sometimes the timeline is super clear. But that it's more rare than not that the timeline is a little fuzzy. The details are always clear, though. So she gets back to me and she goes, look, Lynn, there's trouble in paradise. Like, I need you to call Sorb. I need you to call Sorb. And I'm like, what? Like, what are you talking about? She's like, I just need you to call Sorb. They're going to be able to explain this way better than I am. So here's the name of the person at Sorb. Give him a call. Let me know what you find out. I was like, cool.
Yeah, always fun to call Sorb.
Yeah. So I had never at any point in time been in contact with Sorb. I don't know how many victims are in contact with Sorb or how many survivors, because again, language is important, right, Steve?
Thank you very much.
His victim, but I am a survivor, right?
You're a survivor.
So basically, I called them. I'm put through to a very nice lady, and to this moment, I'm pretty sure there are two ladies that like run that whole office and do all the interface between the public and the board itself, the Sex Offender Registry Board of individuals that classify these people. And I don't know if my advocate had given her a heads up that I was going to call. I'm assuming she did. I give her my name and she begins to go through some things. So, and there was a lot to take in. So the first thing that she said to me was that this gentleman had been reclassified. And I still I can't, this makes no sense to me because number one, I should have been notified that he was even requesting to be reclassified. Correct. Number two, I did not know it was possible to request reclassification. I was told you get leveled at the level that you're at. And that is it. It's a lifetime registration. Come to find out, it's not even a lifetime registration. Once you have been classed, once your case has served its course, once you're off probation, because that's what that means, okay? You have the right after, I believe the first time may be longer, but it's every 3 years to request reclassification. Now, your victim does have the right to be notified of that request, much like your victim has the right to be notified when you request parole. Just to go back a little bit, those are two different notification systems that you as the survivor have to enroll in. Now, I had enrolled in both. However, at the time of my offender's parole hearing, I was not notified. And I found out that for whatever reason, at the time of the conviction, although my paperwork was submitted, and you have to remember, this is before the internet was the way it is. So you had to fill out actual paperwork and fax it. Okay. My advocate had submitted that paperwork at the time of conviction. A few years later, at the time of parole, I was not in the actual system. So they did not. And again, you have to opt in. Okay.
Yeah.
So
it's not an automatic procedure. It's an opt-in procedure.
Exactly. I did not. And come to find out, you have to update that every time your phone number changes, every time you move. It's not just, hey, Lynn Kee is the victim of this offender in this case. She opted to be notified. Let us hit up her registry records and figure out where she lives, hunt her down until we find her. It's no, let us call the last known number and hit up the last known address. That is it. So not only was I not in that system, but who knows how, if I would have had the same information. I don't remember if it changed in that first 3 years. Who knows if they would have been able to get me, but that's another story. I wasn't in the system. Right. So at that point, it was a moot point because he was being paroled. So that DOC system where I needed to be notified
Department of Corrections
was now irrelevant. SORB, the Sex Offender Registry Board, was the one that now mattered so that I could track his movements if I wanted to avoid the town he lived in, for example, or the place he worked or places he worked. So that the public knows when they go to the area he lives in,
Right.
how many level twos in this particular case, because you can only get certain information on certain offenders, so that the public knows that he's there. You know what I mean?
So I can give you a quick, I'm just going to give quick information for
Mm-hmm.
Massachusetts. This is pertaining to Massachusetts only. Level 3, you get a picture and a name. Level 2, you just have that they're in the area. And level 1 is not even reported anywhere. You'd have to request it in order to get it. Please go ahead.
Yes. Yes, and this is such a nuanced situation. Like, the law is so complicated
Oh, I
that
know.
it would take us forever to be super clear. So in any way that we're unclear, please do the research. Like, for real, do the research, because it's a lot different than the general public really realizes. Even a survivor like myself, who really thought she knew the system, right? Like,
You were
and what the
protected, right? Oh,
yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, and it thought, and my advocate is super good at what she does. Moved very far up the chain at this point. Really good at what she does. I know I can trust her. Explained things very thoroughly. Still didn't play out. So anyway, Sex Offender Registry Board is supposed to notify me at this point. It's a separate notification system, which I definitely made sure I was a part of
right.
at the time that I found out he was getting paroled, and I wasn't in that system. New system, got to make sure I'm in it, right? I don't know what happened. I can't remember in this moment if I was also kicked out of that, like never got added to that, or if my information had simply changed. And again, that's a thing I didn't realize. I needed to update. When you change your phone number, when you move, you don't go, I need to notify if the dude's in jail. These 2 or 3 if you're my sister, because ICE is a third one, okay? Right?
And
People that I moved just in case something happens with my rapist. You're trying to put that stuff out of your head, right? So
the
when he
the
got
importance of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is to get your taxes. That they know your name, phone number, address, shoe size, the whole 9 yards. When
never had
you're
a problem hunting me down, just
when you
saying.
when you're a survivor, oh well, it's your responsibility. We won't even look within our system, and that's
Yes.
terrible, terrible, terrible work.
Yes, and they argue, and this is something I'd really like to change, and this is procedural, it would seem. It's not, I don't even think it would require a statute change of any variety. But something I'd like to change is maybe we have an opt-in system, since we already have an opt-in system, to tie the notification systems, all of them,
Oh,
uh
you think the
to
board of probation, the board of parole, and the DOC should all communicate effectively? That's
they
crazy.
should
What the hell are
they
you
should be
talking about?
tied in some way to, like, let's say your registry records. As a survivor, I might opt in to have that tied at the very minimum, if not to each other, because we know that's a problem, right, to my registry records, so that when I move, when I change my phone number, which happens all the time, right, you don't have to, it follows you. That's a
That's
hope I
crazy.
have.
We'd swear that you're going to ask for the Department of Children and Family to also be involved in this and know these things. Stop
Yeah,
asking for the impossible.
I know, it's just
Like
a habit of mine.
protecting our survivors. That's not so important. But anyway, we laugh about it, and it's dark humor for those who might hear her laugh or me smile.
Yeah.
The reality is we need to laugh and smile through this dark stuff because it is terrible.
Yeah, and if you don't laugh at it, you'll never be able to get the
Correct.
gumption to do anything about it, because, evil only flourishes when good men do nothing. And I'm sorry, but I'll be damned if I'm not going to use the pain that I've experienced, and the trauma my sister experienced, to do something good for others. Like, leave the world a little bit better than you found it. It's the
So
only thing I can do with this.
so let's go back
So
to Sorb. We you
so
they
Sorb tells me,
Yeah.
they say, look, we're sorry you weren't, we've already looked into this because we know you're going to ask questions, Lynn. But and they are always so hesitant to tell you these things, because they're going to get yelled at 9 times out of 10. Like, this stuff is incredibly re-traumatizing, and it's triggering. And so you're like, what the fuck? And you're not even mad at the person because they're so nice, but you're just like distraught at the fact that this is
Right.
possible. So I luckily had a lot of experience with that the first time around, and I was ready for it. So I'm like, just hit me with it. Like, it's good. You can talk. Like, you're good. And she's like, oh, thank God. Like, seriously, because this is not fun. I was like, okay, yeah, nope, hit me with it. She's like, not only were you not in the system, or we didn't have your proper information, but he was re-leveled, and he is now a level 1 sex offender, which again is terrifying. because you cannot get any information on a level 1 sex offender. Like, it's crazy. Like, you can, but you have to be special. You know what I mean? The public isn't going to find out that, Joe Schmo is a level 1 sex offender
In other
unless they get a
words,
Corey report on that
correct.
person.
A Corey
Yeah.
report or a Bureau of Probation review that usually only police officers and higher ups in different organizations can have access to. This is not public information, and it is not available.
Now, for comparison, a level 2, which is what he had been up to this point, and this is the better part of 15 years up to this point, right, from his time of conviction, his picture and his name are not posted in the local police department. However, if you gave his name to the local police department, from what I understand, if you were to, look up the level 2s in your area and then request a detailed list, you can get that information. They also have to register. They also do have to register with where they live, with where they work. So again, you're going to know if you go to this business or this area that there's a level 2 sex offender, and you can get that person's name or these people's names if you look. And that's where he was at. So the public was ostensibly a whole lot more protected with this offender at a level 2, because again, it's based on the risk of reoffense, than they were with this person as a level 1. So then this very nice lady at SORB goes on to explain to me that as far as the leveling is concerned, leveling laws have changed. And the reason that she is explaining this to me is because in the course of conversation, and I believe that this was over multiple conversations, like how all of this information that I'm gonna end up snowballing into one piece came out. She goes on to tell me that my sister's offender is going to be leveled level 2 as well. Okay, that his determination just came out. Now, this is a man, Steve, that sodomized a 12-year-old at knife point, held her hostage over a period of hours with his 16-year-old accomplice. So also arguably rape. This was a 26-year-old
Arguably, it is
drug
rape.
drug dealing gang member. In the eyes of the state, it's not rape of a child, though, because she was 16, and that's how disgusting some of our laws are. But anyway, that's why I say arguably, just to be clear, because I believe it is rape. Basically, this man is now, he then ran, right, gone, caught by America's Most Wanted, not even out of jail yet. He's going to be labeled a level 2. And at the time of his conviction, he was found to have been being investigated for raping several other 12-year-olds in New York, where he had originally come from. She therefore felt the need to go on to explain to me that the way that the Sex Offender Registry Board makes these decisions has changed, and changed significantly, which impacted my case, impacted my offender's releveling, and may well be why he requested to be releveled when he did, because it changed right before he requested releveling. The burden of proof now rests on the state of Massachusetts to prove that somebody is a risk of reoffense. And that is significant because prior to this ruling by the Superior Court of Massachusetts, it was on the offender to prove that they are no longer a risk of reoffending. In addition, the burden of proof has increased from most likely, like a civil case, right? Like, it's most likely a thing that this guy is a high risk of reoffense, to a similar standard as a criminal trial, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. So essentially, it takes multiple convictions at the bare minimum in practice. And I know this was not the intention of the court when they did this, okay? In practice, it takes multiple convictions, minimum multiple accusations documented to become a level 3 sex offender. So in practice, let's just be very clear. A gang member, a drug dealer, who was also in this country illegally, who sodomizes a 12-year-old with his 16-year-old accomplice at knife point, and then runs from the courthouse and is on the lam for 2 years, apprehended by America's Most Wanted, is a level 2 because it was only one 12-year-old.
Yep. Lynn, you gave us a lot to I know there's other stuff here.
Yep.
But you gave us a lot to talk about, and really I want my audience to really process that. And I know it's going to seem abrupt to some of you, But I think that we hit the main points that we want to talk about the legal system. I don't want to let you go without you talking to me about, because of your experience, because of everything that's gone on,
Hmm.
you're creating a nonprofit. Tell me more about that.
Yes. And we're creating the nonprofit for so many different reasons. But the number one thing that we're creating the nonprofit to do is fill the gaps that allowed my sister to fall through the cracks. And by that, I mean provide access, adequate access to addicts, all right, with trauma history. And it doesn't have to be a sexual abuse trauma history. There is all sorts of trauma. And I think if you delve into the recovery sphere and talk to any addict, you'll find that most of us have some sort of significant trauma, whether prior to our addiction, we may not even realize it's what led to or drives our addiction, but either prior to or definitely through our addiction, which can oftentimes, if over a period of years, keep you out if it's not the thing that got you out in the first place, and out meaning using.
Yeah.
So for my sister, right, she had the executive dysfunction, the inability to do certain things that might seem simple, like source and set up treatment. And the healthcare system, the way it is in this country, I'm not going to go political here, but it's very difficult to navigate. It's especially difficult to navigate when it comes to substance abuse.
Right.
It's especially difficult to navigate when it comes to trauma informed care. It's especially like uber difficult to navigate, damn near impossible to navigate when it comes to trauma informed care for addicts, at the level of, like, stabilization and every single level after that. So like even getting clean with a dual diagnosis, meaning both mental health and substance abuse issues, that gives you some semblance of trauma informed care, meaning they even know what the symptoms of trauma are and how that's going to impact you as you're trying to get clean, right, is damn near impossible. And so when you add to that you are suffering from all of that actively to the mix, you're going to have a real hard time getting that treatment. So that was my sister's thing. So what I and my family, because it's a group effort, as well as a close friend of mine who is also a survivor, another friend of mine that I've met through just kind of exploring what there is to be done about this process, about this situation, right, is create a specialty case management service for addicts in recovery, because when you're getting into the actual trauma treatment, which is what my sister needed, you should be ideally stabilized, so not actively using,
And
and
then certainly not within the first 3 to 6 months either.
yes, and that, funny you should say that, that makes me feel better, because I'm thinking that looks like about 3 to 6 months in, right, Steve?
I can give you the logic. So when you use, it takes relatively 6 months for your brain to refunction properly.
mm,
So when you start off, I always tell people you can go in recovery all you want, but you're really in sobriety because your brain is still all screwed up because all the like the executive function is not communicating effectively. It's looking for rapid dopamine, rapid response, which is what the substances typically are.
mm-hmm,
So I wanted to share that with you because when people tell me, like I've had too many people come in with their loved ones and they say, you didn't do anything with them for a couple of months. I'm like, be patient, take 6 months. I'm not even worrying about trauma. I'm not even worrying about depression because it's not even depression they're showing. They're showing symptomology of coming off
mm,
substances.
yeah,
So don't put a label yet. I'm not putting in zero labels. And if you're not happy about it, I don't give a crap. And that
no,
again is part
absolutely,
of the trauma response, the trauma informed and substance abuse informed. People who have not worked in substance use, they go like, "Oh, they seem depressed." Yeah, they're not drinking anymore. Of course, they're
right.
fucking depressed.
Yeah, for
Um,
real.
and that's what I tell them. Oh, they're anxious. Yeah, they used to have opioids, and that would calm them down
Mm-hmm.
automatically. Nothing's calming them down. They're like they're hair triggered at that point. You
Oh
cannot give them
yeah.
an anxiety disorder at that point or bipolar because they have mood swings because again the brain is trying to stabilize. Anyway, I wanted to inform people about the substance abuse and the trauma
Yeah.
informed stuff here because I see it too many times. People come in like, they diagnosed me with bipolar when I was coming off whatever. And I'm like, no, you're not bipolar. You're probably just fucked up from your brain not functioning properly for months. But anyway, just wanted to throw that out. The name of the nonprofit is
So we're going to call it, and this is tentative because we're in the process of setting it up. We're going to call it AJ's Way. So as in Amanda Jean, right? As my dad called her AJ, AJ's Way, as in a way out. And again, for my sister, what that would have looked like, and she actually succeeded for like the only time that I can confirm in her adult life in recovery for a couple of years, around the time she got pregnant with and had and was raising in the early years my youngest niece, through drug court. And drug court set up her treatment much the same way I'm envisioning, or we're envisioning, that we'll set up services for these people. They gave her a plan. They didn't just say, hey, you need to go get help. You maybe find a therapist and a psychiatrist, maybe, like, I don't know, go out in nature and take a walk, like, because that's the standard. That's like what these places do. Like, they'll just give you a list and say, hey, go get some help, right? Drug court actually set it up for her. Hey, this is your therapist. You're seeing her on Tuesdays. Once a month, you see your psychiatrist on Thursday at 3 p.m. You're required to go to these groups. You're required to hit this many meetings. Here are some people in the local recovery community that you can speak with if you want to get in with them. We'd suggest you do some alternative therapies, and they would help her set that up. So the way I envision it, and again, the whole first piece of this is going to be doing the research. It's going to require a lot of time and effort to do the research. I'm not a professional by any means. I have lived experience. I'm networking with people like yourself. That's the whole first piece of this. To develop a resource, like a database, right, of trauma-informed care providers. I'm talking everybody from the stuff that you need to get your health insurance going and to get actually stable in housing, because that's something that happens right off the rip when you're getting clean. Oftentimes you need those things, financial assistance and things like that, right? That's not our primary focus, but you got to be stable to get the trauma treatment you need. To your average, therapist, but like your average psychiatrist, your average groups, like I just said. But then, more importantly, the very trauma specific modalities of therapy that exist now that are being discovered and backed up every single day. So that might look like rapid eye movement, EMDR. Right. For those of you that don't know what that is, I'm not going to go into it. Please look it up. It's very
go back
helpful.
to any episode. I think every episode I've ever done there's a mention of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to effectively explain it. Please just do yourself the service of looking it up if you have trauma and you want different modalities. My father, he's a vet with some trauma. He realized he needed to get some more help than just the talk therapy was giving him. He did some EMDR sessions. It changed his life. My sister was never stable enough to go there. She tried, but she wasn't stable enough to go there. Then there's all sorts of somatic therapies, like just look into alternative therapies, trauma-informed treatment. Because again, we are so quick to go talk therapy, medication, meetings. For me, I would not be in the place that I'm at today. And I am going through some shit, Steve, because that is not even, once again, that is not even the tip of the iceberg. I had to, it turns out there was no stay away order because it expires with the probation. I had to fight for a harassment order that I originally won but lost because they didn't extend it. They were like, we're not sure if we can give you this or not. Like, you know what I mean?
I want to know how we can reach you to put ourselves and help you out and be part of this. What would be the best way to reach you?
It would be most likely to email me. I would take phone calls at this point. I need all the help I can get getting this up and running, doing the research I need to do. I would welcome anyone that wants to discuss like the current state of the system when it comes to this end of things. Because having to fight your rapist in court for a harassment order, having to pay a lawyer to do that is incredibly re-traumatizing. This gentleman was actually charged in this particular case because the church did not know that he was a sex offender, even though they had SOP to prevent that. He did not register as having worked at that church. Like, these are all things I'd love to get out there so we can change that. The nonprofit itself is going to have a website. It's ajsway.org, AJS as in Sam, WAY.org. That will be up and running very, very soon.
So, Lynn, I'm going to put in your email address in my show notes. I'm going to put the ajsway.org
Mm-hmm.
in and I just want to thank you again for sharing your story. I can't thank you enough. Please reach out to Lynn. This is an amazing project that she's starting that is very, very much needed. Recovery courts, I've started 2 in Massachusetts myself. I participate in about 5 of them. It's the best case management you'll ever have, and being able to bring that outside of a court system is essential, and I wanna
Mm.
thank you for doing that, and thank you again for the interview.
Thanks, Steve. I truly appreciate the time.
Well, that concludes episode 120 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. Thank you so much, Lynn Kee. I think that you need to all pay attention to these legal ramifications and what happens in the long term after all this occurs. And in a very progressive state like Massachusetts, imagine what happens in other states. I'm not very familiar, but I'm assuming there could be other issues somewhere else. But episode 121 will be with a new guest that I've never had before, but someone I've been watching on TikTok and really enjoy her content. Her name is Jenny Helms Calvin, and she's going to be on episode 121, and I hope you join me then.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States.